Thanks for joining us today. Just a reminder that we love questions from the audience, so you can start commenting your questions now, or you can also add them as we go. I'll be right back on to welcome our guests to the show. Thanks for meeting us for coffee. Watco Logistics makes supply chains simple. Whether it's rail, road, river, ocean, or intermodal, they manage your supply chain with efficiency and care. From heavy haul trucking to e-commerce fulfillment, they tailor solutions that fit your business, no matter the size or the complexity. Watco combines smart technology with real human insight to keep your cargo moving and your operations running smoothly. You can learn more about their full suite of services at watco.com/logistics. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining episode 56 of the Meet Me for Coffee podcast. I'm Samantha Jones, the host. Just a couple of announcements this morning before we get into our conversation and I bring our guests on. And also, we did just get some notifications that there might be some issues on LinkedIn's end with the live streaming. So if that's the case, hopefully it's resolved here shortly. My producer's checking into it. But we are live right now on YouTube, and we also will run back pre-recorded indefinitely, I believe, on LinkedIn. So you can find it anytime later today and in the future. But we'll see how that goes if we get that resolved here soon. Couple of announcements, conferences. We are now in the month of the JOC Inland Distribution Conference. So that conference runs September 29th to October 2nd. I will be there with the podcast. There are so many great speakers. I get to moderate an awesome panel actually about cross-border logistics, which I'm excited to do because that's an area that I've dabbled in here and there understanding, but I get to hear from some experts on my panel. And then there's a lot of cool panelists, panels focused on technology, on the actual inland distribution, so drayage markets, rail markets, and just the future of our industry and what's going to be happening in the next year. There's also, as of course, on par with the theme of this podcast, there will be a North American freight market outlook and economic update. So excited for that as well. And then I also saw that we're going to have believe Jim Vena is his name, the CEO of the rail. This whole big acquisition thing is coming on to talk about if this is actually going to happen, if these two railroads are going to be allowed to merge. I just thought that was really timely. I've heard it's going to be a long process of evaluation, so I'm just looking forward to hearing him share his thoughts directly on what might be happening. So anyway, meet us in Chicago if you guys can. I put in the comments the code to save you 15% off your registration. It's Coffee Inland 25, and that saves you 15%. And then it's not too early to start thinking about Manifest, which is in Las Vegas in February. We are a proud partner of the Manifest conference. This is, I believe, our 3rd or 4th year running with that. And we have a link that automatically applies a $200 discount when you register through the link. And that link is also in the comments. So start thinking forward into next year already if you guys would like to save some money on that. Registrations only go up closer to the event. Okay. I have no more announcements, so without further ado, I'd like to bring on my friends Ken and Dean from DAT. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
I know you guys so well. I've had you both on this podcast a couple times at this point, and I know a lot of people are familiar with you, but just in case anyone is hearing your heads here on the screen for the first time, can you guys introduce yourselves and share a little bit more about your background?
Sure. I'm Ken. I'm Chief of Analytics here at DAT. I've been here for a minute now, a bit of a long timer. One constant has been overseeing analytics and freight market intelligence over the last 18 or so months. I have also dabbled a bit in corporate development and partnerships. For those who've been following along, we've acquired 3 companies in that time. It's been super fun. But again, hard to turn off the nerddom of studying the freight markets. So that's always going to be my first passion here at DAT.
I'm closely behind. I joined just after Ken. Ken's in fact my boss at DAT. I've been here I think Ken is at about 5 years now, just over 5 years for both of us, I think.
Be 6 in December for me.
Yeah. So I'm about
I was a customer for 7 or so years before that. So what is that? Coming up on almost 13 years of being around DAT.
Yeah, I had almost 5 years at FreightWaves, so we were closely aligned with DAT during the development of the Freight Futures contract way back then. It's when I first met Claude, our former CEO. So I do market analytics. I work for Ken on the data team. Most of my work is focused on the carrier side of the industry, so I'm a truck nerd, probably first and foremost, as opposed to a data guy. But I live and breathe trucks. Literally, I was up at the truck show in Quebec, or the truck races in Quebec over the weekend, breathing in a lot of nasty fumes at the truck races. So still recovering from that. But I spend most of my time studying what makes truckload supply what it is, which direction the market's heading, and spend most of my time actually during the DAT week out with customers talking about the freight market and where we think it's going. I'm heading out to the Cotting and Butler show this week in Schaumburg, and then over to Bay and Bay in Minneapolis to talk to their logistics and asset team about the freight market. So that's what I do.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys both for making some time to be here today. Also, my producer did just let me know we're back at it on LinkedIn, so that's good.
I know. I just
minor
liked
delay.
it. I saw it out there.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to go ahead and just set the stage here a little bit, and then I'm going to open the floor back up to you guys. This podcast was kind of born out of a small comment that was made in my last podcast I had Dean on. And Ken, usually you're able to join us for the market updates, but weren't this year. We had Dean on, so you guys are both familiar with kind of what we talk about on those in the future of the next 6 months or so, the freight market and what we can expect. And you made a comment, I think, that said something about a lot of things are fundamentally changing in the way the freight market operates. And I couldn't let that one go. And I said, yeah, I think we need to talk about that more, because I've been saying the same now. Maybe we meant different things, but I think for me, it's been since like mid 22 into 23, I've been saying I think things are we're just heading down a different trajectory now. Like we've advanced so much in certain ways with technology and different capabilities in our space and the way we manage relationships and procurement, that I think things are going to really change. And so I'm kind of the opinion that maybe in 5 years we won't see a brokerage start and scale the way a brokerage could have 5 years prior to today. So I just want to take some time today to unpack kind of what we see as the evolution of the freight market in terms of the participants. So brokers, carriers, and the shippers that kind of make up this community. So I'd like to just turn it over to both of you to take some time, share your thoughts on where you think we're headed. What do you think might be changing fundamentally in our marketplace? And love to hear it.
I think, Samantha, I was thinking back to that comment. I think I was referring to the movement side of the freight, how things are changing, like fundamentally changing. I mean, we've got a pretty big geopolitical event happening in, I think it's China today, where, is it called the axis of upheaval, is apparently meeting. That's changing, and it's got to do with imports, of course, coming into California, which is what I was really referencing in terms of the dramatic impact of the trade war with China, because it's having a big impact on the dray community, the intermodal community out of Los Angeles, because so much of our freight has been built around this infrastructure in Los Angeles and the West Coast. I remember Zach Strickland at Freightways said many, many years ago, and it was a really interesting headline, and it was very accurate back then, that as California goes, so does the rest of the freight market, and that was certainly the case. I don't think that holds true anymore, because if you think about the massive congestion we had in California during the pandemic, people started to reroute imports to ports like, Gulfport, Biloxi, Mobile, Houston. So those ports started to attract a lot more volume. And of course, that was following the deepening of all of the East Coast ports to 50 feet to take the mega vessels. So you'd already been seeing this structural shift in how freight was moving away from the West Coast. And then, of course, we had the Red Sea crises, the port strikes. There's been so much change in the last 5 years. But one of the things that appears to be sticking is the fall off in imports coming into the West Coast. And that's, I think, will structurally change how that freight market works on the West Coast. That was sort of the genesis, I think, of that comment last time we spoke.
Sure. And so that was something that me and I covered a lot on the podcast or in the newsletter during the actual time where that freight was shifting to Savannah, to Houston, to New York, New Jersey. And I commented and remarked on how much infrastructure was being built and committed to in these ports and warehouses, and whole supply chains were reconfigured.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't think this is something that goes back. It doesn't just swing back to the West Coast, because we have so many monetary commitments now in development across all of our ports. And so I think we're much more diverse and flexible now. That's probably another part of that, Dean, is like companies got comfortable doing things they hadn't done before, and now it's not as scary to.
Well, one constant is change. Even last week there was the announcement of another Transcon railroad. The one that caught my attention was Phoenix to Atlanta, and of course that's a big truckload lane. And the reason that's interesting, Phoenix was, of course, a home for a lot of imports from Asia during the pandemic, because there wasn't a lot of space in the Los Angeles market to have access to in terms of warehouse capacity. A lot of new warehouse capacity emerged in the Phoenix market, became a real staging area for, and because it's always a backhaul market, it became a great place to stage freight for further destination to other markets. If they start to put a direct line between Phoenix and Atlanta, that takes away volume from the truckload market, makes it an even deeper backhaul market. So that impacts pricing on the way into that market, of course. So there's sorts of things that are happening that seem to be more constant as we sort of move through time.
There was another announcement too, and you're going to have to maybe, if you know, help me, but I think it was UP announced like a expedited service from LA to, was it Chicago? Or it was like a major truckload lane that they said, hey, we're going to do this now. We're going to have fast service. And it was basically announced, and I read it on UP's website, and it was like, it said right there, this is competitive and comparative to your full truckload service. And
I think it's the Z train they call it. I think it's a 55-hour service. And that's significant. I think about 30% of the international boxes run on that lane, or certainly intermodal boxes. That could be a combination of 20s, 40s, and 53s. So I think Braille's trying to figure out how to be more competitive with truckload. They've certainly taken market share away from truckload as the market has slowed down, because it's become, if you follow Ari Asher's Journal of Commerce, intermodal savings index, contract shippers have been saving about 25% over truckload contract rates and about 18% on spot. So shippers have been using intermodal, I think, a lot more to save money, especially for slower moving commodities.
Yeah. Physical geography pattern changes that are likely not to reverse back to what we used to be comfortable with. And we have rail also, which is, there's a lot of changes happening in rail right now. And I think they're making it clear they're attempting to be more competitive with the domestic full truckload market as well. So Ken, thoughts on anything and everything and kind of what you think is the future of our market?
Yeah, I mean, despite how bad it's been over the last year and a half, 2 years, I do think we're kind of still firmly in the age of the brokerage. I don't think brokerage share is going away or going to be diminished. I think as shippers adopt more and more of their API and bid portal platforms, they go to more freight orchestration and RFP management tools like GoodShip. As an example, I think that really sets things up well for the continued proliferation of brokerage. I think that's the one thing that's different. I mean, if you look at like let's call it like 2019 is a little different because I think like acutely it's hard to weigh how bad it is now versus how bad it was at the end of 19, early 20. Both were pretty bad. Sure. But I also think like that industrial driven recession in was it 16? 15, 16 was really, really bad from a volume standpoint. Rates maybe didn't dip down as low, but from a volume standpoint, that was really, really slow, especially, working at a carrier in the Midwest that moved a lot of auto and manufacturing freight. But the brokerage share is up systemically a considerable amount since then. And I really don't see that going away. I think the way the market is composed will change quite significantly. Everyone's been afraid, as long as I've been in the industry, of this big bad mega broker coming along and getting to 50, 60, 70 billion dollars of freight spend. That's not happened. I think there's probably a reasonable amount of evidence that the largest brokers today are as large as a brokerage could feasibly get. I'm not saying that's causal. I don't think there's any like actual physical limitations on it. It just seems like some of these big ones have been as big as they are for a very long time. Yeah. What you've seen is continued. When I was started in the industry, the Transport Topics top 100 brokers had maybe 5 brokers over $1 billion. I think that now that number's pushing over 20, or if it's not crossed 20, it's close to 20. So I think you'll see more and more. I think like the $100 million brokerage will kind of be the new floor for what you'd consider like an enterprise broker going forward.
Do you think there'll be increased diversity once we get up to like $100 million plus? You think we'll see more brokerages reach that threshold?
Yeah, I mean, I think the tools and again, partly I'm biased and I'm drinking a little bit of my own Kool-Aid because a lot of DAT's investment philosophy over the last year and a half has been to help brokers of all size, but certainly brokers that are aspiring to scale do so in a more effortless and streamlined way. It wasn't easy, right? You had to pick your TMS and maybe do macro point texting for your check calls, when as recently as 10 years ago. And now you've got automated appointment scheduling, you've got digital freight matching, you've got end-to-end visibility and supply chain management. You've got new bid tools to help you respond to shippers. You've got companies like AVRL and Tabby that help you respond to get way more at bats. So, I mean, I don't know. I would much rather start a brokerage today than 10 years ago.
Sure.
If I was a scale-minded entrepreneur and I didn't have a non-compete, today would be the day, I think, to go start a brokerage.
What about the non-scale-minded entrepreneurs? Because I think the data is that there's like over 90% of brokerages are less than $1 million or something like that. So will that continue, or do you think that decreases the more we see these $100 million shops kind of find their success?
I'm going to break my own rule. I hate comparing brokers to real estate agents or brokers because I think like there's not a lot of comparison, but there actually is an interesting stat of like I think it's over 95% of all homes are sold by less than 5% of all people who have realtor licenses, real estate. It's because a lot of people get, their real estate license just to get advanced. They might be flippers. They might just want to see listings before they come in. They might be doing it on the side. So, there's 27,000, 25,000 brokers out there that are licensed in freight. And yet 90% of all freight is moved by the top 1,000. And then I think even within that, that's a misleading statistic, because I think 88% is moved by the top 500. So I think most brokers are out there, and there's like the agency model leads to those numbers getting a little inflated. They're out there maybe servicing a single shipper, or that's a shipper that has a brokerage MC just so that they can broker freight. And so I think, I don't know. I think there's always going to be these niches. If I wasn't a growth-minded entrepreneur, the best advice I would give someone is to specialize. And we know brokers that move nothing but chicken for one of the major major poultry suppliers, and that's all they do. They feed their family, they feed their couple employees, and they live a good, a good life doing that. But I think the growth-minded brokers are going to probably put more pressure on them over the years, I would say.
So in the last few years, we have seen more brokerages emerge and grow. I've had a lot of fun watching a few brokers just in the last probably 4 years go from like nothing to $100 million plus brokerages. So there's some really rapidly growing, shops out there, if you will. And we have more now, like you said, than we used to in that top 100. So I would think the logical conclusion is that more freight volumes are being allocated to brokers from these shippers. I don't think it's just that all these brokers started taking freight away from the big brokers. Well, that could be part of it. There could be some competition. There always is. But what does this mean for carriers? Like, what's happening on the carrier side? Because brokers taking more market, brokers winning higher volumes, getting into more contract freight, using technology to process more spot freight. Ultimately, they're the part that's connecting this, right? But they're connecting to a carrier. So what are we seeing happen on the carrier side as brokers are evolving in this marketplace?
I think the big thing I'm seeing, Samantha, is they're finding carriers that are better suited to the commodity and the brokerage. So through the technology, they're finding carriers that, whether it be looking at lat long plots from a trace and track or an ELD device, they're finding patterns in where carriers prefer to run, assuming the plot of lat long is their preference. They're being able to match loads. That smart matching capability, I think, is enormous, because carriers have a difficulty having that level of visibility to, first of all, know what to ask, and then secondly, who to ask in the brokerage market. So I think that matching of from a brokerage about what carriers run on this lane to a carrier looking for brokers that are searching for trucks on a lane is adding a lot more smart capacity into the market and helping utilization on the carrier side and reducing cost on the broker side. That's certainly what I'm seeing from the carriers side of it. Seeing a lot more carriers enter the market and be more content with the market because they've got less volatility. There's more predictability for them, because that's what they really strive for, is predictability, so they can be home more often and less downtime, less deadhead miles.
Yeah. Is there a sweet spot for carriers, like fleet size or types of carriers that are partnering with these brokers?
Oh, I've not seen anything particular. I was really talking just about the one truck owner, because the previous question you asked, Ken, like there's never been a better time to buy a truck and get into the market from a technology perspective, because the technology allows you to see the entire market and operate really efficiently. Now, the rates and demand are another question, but just from a technology perspective, has never been a better time to understand the freight market and be able to navigate your way through it successfully.
Yeah, I think it's a flywheel, right? And I think it's hard to find which one's the cause and which one's the effect. But right during COVID, we saw a massive shift in average carrier size. And I mean, that shift is more noticeable in kind of the abstract. I think maybe it went from 2.8 to 1.9 or something like that. But that's huge, right? When you consider how many more carriers that would throw off in terms of total counts. And shippers are much less likely to work with smaller carriers, which means the broker sits in the middle. And so I think that's the flywheel that spins, is that we haven't seen the toothpaste go back in the tube, where fleets have started to consolidate upwards. We've seen attrition, but we've seen attrition largely along the same size profile that was installed post-COVID. So in that regard, I think that's why brokerages have remained so sticky, is because carriers have found value and benefit, not just in times of crisis, but in all kind of freight market cycles. And therefore, I think changed probably at least semi-permanently the overall composition of that spot market exposed trucking landscape.
So from a shipper standpoint, when we're talking about procurement of capacity, they seem to be growing in confidence in trusting brokers with their freight, especially when it comes to, different ways they can connect with them through API or technology. From my experience, because I used to be I did all sales. I did from the small guys and worked my way up to enterprise sales, where I was working with, some of the Fortune 100 guys in our nation. And what I observed a lot is at the time that, they don't want to manage a lot of vendors. That's difficult. That's expensive. It's costly. And so they were most of them were still kind of trying to follow the 80-20 rule or 70-30 rule, where they had 80% asset. And when they said asset, from what I kind of experienced, it mostly meant like your big fleets, like your mega fleets, and then maybe like the 300, 500 trucks, like kind of in that range too, where they were giving contractual awards. And then pretty much anything after that, like, went to a few strong brokerage partners. So is it getting easier now with like the good ships that you mentioned, Ken, and these procurement platforms and technology to probably, I imagine, assist with better onboarding and vetting of providers? Do you think we'll start to see them being more willing to open up to partnering with mid-size fleets that are, when I say mid-size, I'm talking like the 50 to 300 truck fleets directly? Or are they still looking at that now as a way a broker serves their business?
I really think brokerage share is going to keep going up into the right, and not only for that, but for a lot of reasons. I don't know. I know there's a lot of discourse about this online, but when you kind of actually go back into reality, I think, an average broker right now, market wide, is extracting 12% markup for their services. And I think when you look at that from the lens of a shipper, that is an extremely good value. For what?
You're saying, in other words, what they're paying them in margin is better than what they could do to manage a large portfolio.
Right. And that's even not considering like average claim rates and all of the financial shielding that a broker provides, right? I mean, if the industry didn't turn over at 100% per year on average, then maybe I would say that, like, if you only had to recruit that truck once and you had reasonable certainty that fleet would stick with you for years. But the fact of the matter is, even within that fleet, there's a tremendous amount of turnover. So I think, like, again, it comes down to, it's a heck of a deal. Brokers have really stepped up their game, and they've been forced, frankly, to step up their game in the last. It's why you've seen the industry get very proactive. When you see industries get very proactive about stuff that they don't want to do, I think that's always a pretty, like, the track and trace thing is like what I'm referring to first and foremost. It went from being a very dirty word that you weren't forced to do, so you're never going to do, to like, have you ran across a brokerage in the last couple of years that wasn't forcing 90+% compliance of app or ELD track and trace? It's like, no, they're all self-imposing those amongst their carrier base. So that to me is indicative of brokerage is here to stay.
Samantha, I don't know if you follow Andrew Smith from Circle. He made a comment last week on LinkedIn. I thought it was really interesting. He said, I'll quote, "Flat is a thing, cycles are wishful thinking." And it was at the same time I was looking at our data, which really showed that dry van rates had been identical pretty much week over week for 3 years. And I was just thinking about why that was. And I wonder about this discussion we're just having now about how technology is flattening out the range of movement of rates up and down on both sides of the transaction, because shippers, brokers, and carriers have largely accessed the same data and technology. I mean, I don't know the answer to that, so I guess I'm posing a question to both of you if that's explained.
I think that, to me, rings a bell in a conversation I had with Ken and Jason Miller. Like, this might be going on 2 years ago now, on one of the market updates where I asked, like, are we going to see increased volatility in our freight market cycles or decrease because of all the technology availability? And And I think I was hoping, we could see a decrease in volatility because everybody's kind of on the same page. But maybe it was Jason, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, who posed, the thought that, well, we can react in more real time now to changes in the environment. So you actually might see more dramatic spikes or drops, but they're much shorter lived than what they would have been if they acted with a lag, as like everybody kind of got, oh, the news slowly spread. This is what's going on in this marketplace. And it affected capacity in those markets or rates in those markets. But I was kind of hoping that, hey, we have all this technology now. We can all be on the same page. We can quit with the market swings and the volatility and these cycles where there's bottoms and tops. But I mean, I haven't seen that happen. So I think
that's why you're seeing carriers, especially smaller carriers, struggling so much because they're waiting for the market to turn, but there's no sign that it's going to turn in a way that they think it'll turn based on the past, because things are very flat. We made the call 12 months ago that things are going to be very flat this year, and that's pretty much how they've turned out in terms of from the start to the finish of the year. Rates haven't really moved all that much. But that doesn't make carriers very happy, because I think if they were honest, they love the times of volatility on the upside, but just not the downside.
Yeah.
I think it's really difficult. I don't agree that the cycle's gone. I mean, it's existed way before the most recent two. It goes all the way back to deregulation. And I think it's not really indicative of technology or anything else. It's just indicative of, like, it's a hard market to find equilibrium because it's a quasi commodity. So it gets very easily overbought and oversold. And you have such a imbalanced effect where demand has a much higher weight on the market than supply. And I think it just drives these kind of wilder swings. So I think, I don't know, coming into, I think, post-presidential election, there was a lot of optimism that we were going to see interest rates come down and demand return and people buying things again and things moving around. I think that was really true for about 6 weeks. I think we had a peak hangover like we haven't had in a number of years for about 6 weeks. And then this tariff thing came, and it just, who's willing to invest right now? What do investors like? They like certainty, or at least they like stability. And we might have to refund all of these duties. And then what does that do to interest rates? And it's putting pressure on treasury rates. It's quite the mess. And so I think the freight markets are stuck because the economy's stuck. It's not going up, it's not going down. And, I don't personally think that looking at the top 20 companies in the S&P 500 that are weighting the entire composite right now because of demand for AI, chips, and technology is a fair barometer of the overall economy. I think it's just stuck. And when interest rates come down, I do think demand will come up and we'll start to see a cycle. I think it'll be a cycle very similar to the one that immediately preceded ELDs.
2017, 16, 17.
I have to admit, I'm a little concerned, I think, with our supply base, because it's like, I'm not seeing headlines on it, so maybe it's out of proportion, but I'm hearing it a lot, almost on a weekly basis, because I work with brokers and I work with some carriers, and I'm hearing, like, we just had a 200 truck partner just say they're closing shop, like from these brokers that I'm talking to. And that's happening like almost on a weekly basis, where there's some type of mid-sized fleet that some of them aren't even bankrupt. They're literally just like, we're done. Like, this isn't going to work for another 6 months for us. So before we are bankrupt, we're going to pay all our people out. We're going to be done. And I'm just kind of concerned about how much capacity we're quietly losing before something could potentially change in 2026 that would create that imbalance again.
I wouldn't worry too much because it's pretty much at equilibrium. We're actually gaining net carriers this month, much to everyone's sort of chagrin.
Can you explain that? Can you explain how we can be gaining carriers when carriers are literally having to close the shop because they can't afford to run at these? I don't want to say afford to run at these rates, but they obviously cannot, in whatever pocket of business they're doing, sustain their operations.
I mean, some can. If you have your truck paid off and you have good insurance rates, you're profitable now. Not as profitable as you'd like to be, but I mean,
sure.
I mean, Dean can speak to that. I think it's the reason why for hundreds of years, as long as there's been a liquid stock market, people have wanted a correction and not like a malaise. I think a perfect world for younger folks who are properly invested is about every 3 or 4 years, the market corrects down sharply, and you take that as an opportunity to buy and get things back on pace. And for the freight market, that's been about every 2 or 3 years. The well-established, the disciplined fleets treat these market cycles as a way to go out and invest. They gobble up the books of business and even the equipment from the smaller trucks, and then they're on their merry way. I think like these are rather unprecedented times where things are just not moving. I look at it like a bell curve, right? Dean does a great job illustrating this, but like, I don't know, maybe the right 15% of the bell curve is unprofitable now, which is a lot. I mean, that's a lot of trucks and carriers, but like the vast majority of carriers are still able to turn a profit at this moment. Not a good one, certainly not the ones they were turning, or the ones like they would have expected this to be over by now, is I guess the macro point. And it's just not. It's just, how long can you get by not paying yourself and not doing scheduled maintenance is, I guess, the big question.
Yeah, I think we get, we think about the freight market and long distance freight of all kinds as the freight market, right? I mean, almost 90% of freight moves under 250 miles. And I go to truck shows every weekend with all of these guys, and they are doing exceptionally well. Like, you don't go to truck shows with shiny trucks and lots of chrome unless you're doing really, really well. And these are all got great trucks, great drivers. They spend a lot of money on their drivers and equipment. They haul freight that is really well paying. So that's the majority of the industry. When you get out to the fringe, like Ken's talking about, where the margins get compressed and you've got a lot more distance and a lot more volatility in the market and a lot more miles and empty miles, that's where you start to see the entries and exits in the market. And like 200 trucks leaving won't make a big difference in the big scheme of things. But to answer your question that Ken sort of alluded to, we had in the month of August, we had 6,529 carrier authority revocations and 6,536 new authorities. So it was like
oddly close to.
Yes, that's been the trend. That's been the trend for like 2 or 3 years. Like Ken said a few years ago, for every 10 that leave, 8 join. It's getting closer to every 10 that leave, 10 join. So, but I think the capacity is a little bit different. Zach Rogers that produces the Logistics Managers Index report summed it up. He said that the capacity that's joining is what he calls smart capacity. It's moving to where the growth is. So if you're losing a long distance carrier, you might be picking up someone with a straight truck and a lift gate because there's a lot more final mile freight moving, for example. I'm not saying that's exactly what's happening, but that was the example he gave. Anecdotally, that's certainly what we see in the market, where you're seeing a higher growth in, even on our business, we're seeing a significant growth in part loads on our load board, which is indicative of how freight dynamics have changed. And of course, that drives day cab truck sales and box trucks, which is something we've seen as a major component of the demand since the pandemic.
Well, we're getting close to time here. We might be a little over time, but I want to ask one last question, just kind of as we wrap up. We kind of talked about what things have changed or might be changing, but I'd like to hear from you guys on what things are going to stay the same. What are those truths that we've always seen, that we've always experienced, that you guys don't think are changing in the near future? I mean, Ken, you just kind of alluded to one by saying, we talked about how you think that we're still going to keep the cycles. So do we still keep cycles? Are they still going to be similar to previous cycles in severity? But what other things also will be remaining the same going forward?
I don't think any level of technology. I mean, we just bought a company that automates end-to-end the freight transaction. And I'm going to stand here and say, I still don't think any level of technological proliferation is going to minimize the impact of relationships in this industry. It is the biggest small industry in the world. I've been thinking for over a decade of another industry of ours, $1 trillion industry, that is this small and relationship driven. And so I think the ability to need to operate sometimes like a commoditized industry from a ruthless cost and efficiency perspective, and also blend that with your time and talents on the sales and relationship side, is not going to go away. I think thinking that you're going to set up an API autoresponder as a broker and become $1 billion broker by next Tuesday is not going to happen. I still think it's building those relationships, it's managing the exceptions, it's doing all of the little things really, really well. We went down and saw a broker in Columbus. My whole team went down for our offsite. And I think that's just what they're relentlessly focused on, is adapting technology where it makes sense, but then also never losing that connection to the customer. Because when competition comes in, the technology is not going to save you as much as it is your track record and your relationship. So I don't really see that changing, at least in the next 10 years.
Okay.
Dean?
I think we'll see I think we'll continue to see high turnover in the small end of the industry. A lot of people that join the trucking industry are not joining to build a business; they're buying a job, and that brings with it not a lot of business acumen out of the gate or commitment to gather it. So I think we're going to see a continuation of that turnover in that end of the market because it's too easy to get in. Despite all of our efforts to clamp down, I do think we'll see some impact from the authorities on carriers that have been able to skirt the regulations and get CDLs. I hope we start to clamp down on that. That's never been a good thing. So I think and what that brings is carriers will continue to have selective memories. Remember, we were having May Day protests in May of 2020. We had ELP pop up this year. Now it's non-domicile CDLs, but it was absolute crickets when rates were $5 a mile during the pandemic and money was falling from the sky. Yeah. You can't have it both ways. I'm sorry, guys.
Great. Awesome. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. I think I'll be taking probably a lot of short clips out of this one because there's a lot of things said that I really enjoyed hearing your perspectives on. So we'll get those reshared to the community for anyone who couldn't listen to the whole thing or struggles with a 30-minute attention span. I've heard that's a thing these days. So
guilty.
Yeah.
Where will you guys be? Will you guys be out on the road anytime this year? Can people, Dean, you just told me you're heading to one. So what's your schedule look like where people could bump into you in person? And if not in person, what's a good way to connect with you?
LinkedIn is probably the easiest way. Just DM me on LinkedIn. I'm at the Big Iron Classic this weekend in Rochester, Minnesota. It's one of the more famous Midwest truck shows. I'll be at Mine Expo in Las Vegas coming up. Going out with Cody Kohler. So we're going for a really interesting tour of some produce farms in Salinas, California. It's been my bucket list to go and have a look at some of the big lettuce and strawberry farms. That's coming up in 2 weeks.
Yeah, that'll be cool. I've seen lots of pictures and worked with companies that very closely to that, but never seen it myself. So very cool.
I don't know where I'm going to be or where I'm going, but I'll be somewhere. And I'll be out there, like I said, we're coming off a pretty busy 18-month stretch. Pretty busy conference season this fall. I haven't quite penned out my entire schedule, but I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. I'm at the Freight Nerd on Twitter, or you can just reach out direct and happy to have a chat.
Awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much for being here today. And I really appreciate you guys for meeting us for coffee. And the last thing I want to say, too, is thank you so much to our sponsor, Watco Logistics. We talked a lot about the future of rail, truckload, and they are positioned in all of those spaces to serve. So they have some really unique service offerings with short rail and rail line services. So they have very diversified niche bases across OTR transportation, rail, truck, barge logistics, which is something I know not a lot about, but they have a really cool portfolio of services. So hope you guys get a chance to check them out. But thank you everyone for being here, for meeting us for coffee, for hanging through the little LinkedIn blip we had at the beginning. But we appreciate you and we'll see you guys next time.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much for meeting us for coffee. I'm so excited to be partnered with Watco as our show sponsor. Not only was Watco founded in my home state of Kansas, but the solutions they provide are, in my honest opinion, unmatched. If you have questions about Watco, you can scan this QR code to connect, check out the link in the episode description, or you can shoot me a message on LinkedIn directly, and I'm happy to talk more. If you enjoyed today's show, I'd love if you could leave a rating on your platform of choice. We'll see you next time.